Hello and welcome to ViewPoint. I'm Anusha Soni. The visit of the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan has led to escalation of tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Today, the Chinese military announced joint air and sea drills near Taiwan, along with test launches of conventional missiles in the sea east of the country. China fired ballistic missiles and deployed fighter jets and warships as it held its largest ever military exercise around the island nation. This is a clear escalation by the Chinese, and experts are worried about the peace and stability of yet another region in the country being jeopardized. While the key question is whether this is another confrontational front that the Chinese will indulge into. Can US and China afford another confrontation on the world map? Can the international community come together to douse this fire before it gets too big to contain? Our top focus on ViewPoint.
Live-fire missile drills. Choppers and jets deployed. Long-range rockets launched. A day after Nancy Pelosi's Taiwan visit, the Dragon is breathing fire. China is holding its largest ever military exercise in the seas around Taiwan. The exercises are taking place in multiple zones around Taiwan. Some are just within 20 kilometers of the island. In the border island of Pingtan, Chinese military choppers were seen flying past. China has also deployed 2 aircraft carriers to the north and south of Taiwan. According to Taipei's defense ministry, China fired multiple ballistic missiles into waters around Taiwan. Beijing has defended the drills as necessary and blamed the US for the escalation.
We are left with no choice but to take resolute measures to uphold our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And will this become a new normal? It hinges on the action of the US side and the Taiwan independence forces.
Despite China's fury, Nancy Pelosi's extraordinary stopover in Taiwan was the first high-level visit by a US official in 25 years. But by pledging support to Taiwan's democracy, a shadow has been cast on Washington's One China policy.
America stands with Taiwan. I think that whatever China was going to do, they will do in their own good time.
So given the backlash that we're witnessing from China, has Pelosi's visit caused more harm than good?
Well, getting you some more latest updates coming in. The Taiwanese army has begun moving 155mm M114 howitzers and 120mm mortars closer to PLA's exercise areas. This is clearly the defensive front that the Taiwanese would want to put forward in the wake of a very aggressive Chinese posturing along the Taiwanese Strait. And that's the concern that most experts have said, that one has to wait and watch how this really goes to play on in the next few hours and in the next few days. Will this lead to actual confrontation? Will we also see other international players like the US really get involved into this conflict? Or will this be resolved after this aggressive posturing by the Chinese? We all know how it really started after the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, a visit that was frowned upon by Beijing. They had condemned the visit and they had said this is in stark contravention to One China policy, something which has been recognized by the United States of America. While many experts also argue that this is also reminiscent of what we saw in 1995-96, where there was a similar confrontation between Taiwan and China, and even that time a visit of a Taiwanese president to America had irked the Chinese. Will this once again lead to some kind of aggressive posturing in the days to come? Well, on your screen right now are the exclusive visuals that we are getting for you, which the Taiwanese media has put out. These are visuals that tell you how Taiwan as a nation, as an autonomous region, as it recognizes itself to be, India doesn't recognize that position, is guarding its own territory and its interests. That's what most journalists and experts from Taiwan have also been saying, that Taiwan wants peace and stability, but it's going to defend its interests. Let's see how that really plays out in the next few days. Well, joining us on the broadcast are our esteemed panel. Professor Brahma Chalni is joining us on the broadcast, who's a strategic affairs expert. Andrew K. Leung, who's an international independent China strategist based in Hong Kong, is also joining us. Manju Seth is also with us on the broadcast. She's a former diplomat. And Dr. Nancy Snow is also joining us. Professor Chalni, I'm coming to you first. How do you view this situation? Is it likely to get worse in the next few days? Is it reminiscent of the third Taiwanese Strait crisis that we had earlier seen?
Well, it's not so much about Nancy Pelosi's Taipei visit. It's more about U.S. policy.
Yes.
And the policy of appeasement that Joe Biden has been pursuing since he took office. He's been making a series of concessions to China. He's now even thinking of rolling back the Trump-era tariffs on Chinese goods. And more importantly, Beijing has seen that its expansionism in the South China Sea, its gobbling up of Hong Kong, its detention of more than 1 million Muslims in Xinjiang, all that has been cost-free for China. No tangible sanctions have been imposed on China in response to its expansionism or draconian steps. That is what's encouraging China. And if you look at the live fire drills that began today, they have effectively encircled Taiwan. They are creating a temporary blockade of much of Taiwan. These exercises are a dress rehearsal of what an invasion would look like. The drills simulate enforcing an air and sea blockade around Taiwan. And the target zones of the drills are the closest to Taiwan's main island that we have ever seen, because these drills have reached into waters within 12 miles of the Taiwanese coastline.
Yeah.
So the actions are highly provocative.
Yeah.
But these actions will not lead to war. What will lead to war is if Xi Jinping continues to perceive American weakness.
If Xi Jinping continues to perceive American weakness, is that the message that America has really put out? Andrew K. Leung, I'm coming to you. What is your view? What Beijing or the posturing of the Chinese, and this is not the first confrontational front that they have opened, they have adopted a very confrontational tone and tenor with multiple countries across the world. This is a very aggressive Beijing in China. Is it because of some kind of appeasement by the US? Or the changing dynamics of the geopolitics? And more importantly, what lies in the days to come? What is your assessment?
Well, let's face it. It was the United States, the Pelosi visit, which thoroughly provoked China into this, because China already warned very sternly, even at the level of President Xi talk with President Biden, that this is really the lubricant. And then if that happens, then China would have to take drastic action. And in spite of that, Nancy Pelosi went ahead with it, poking China in the eye. So you've got to relate to what has happened, what has caused this. And if for China to just turn the other cheek, that's simply not possible. Because otherwise, the one China policy will continue to be all about. Because in spite of the lip service paid by the United States government, honoring China policy, is keeping on hollowing out the whole concept by feeding higher and higher level officials to visit Taiwan and creating more and more diplomatic and other space Taiwan today, as if Taiwan was a separate country. So the red line was drawn firmly in the sand, and someone just walk over it, trample over it. And what do you expect China to do?
Well, but Andrew, there's also a caveat that had come from the United States of America. They were not exactly very happy with Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan. And in many ways, the Biden administration tried to maintain an arm's length with that visit.
Well, I mean, of course, there was an initial sort of displeasure. And of course, the United States government cannot order the Speaker of the House to do. But on the other hand, Nancy Pelosi is the third highest ranking official. Is the second in line in succession to the president. So it's no wonder that China feels extremely provoked, extremely feeling as blighted. And this is the reaction. Now, it's not as if China is mounting an invasion, because according to assessment given by the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, at his hearing at the Senate a couple of months ago, the conclusion was that Beijing has not yet possessed 100% confidence to prevail over Taiwan, because and so that was a very dangerous move,
All right.
rash if China wanted to mount an invasion. But China needs to teach Taiwan a lesson, and this is not being taught.
All right. I want to bring in Dr. Nancy Snow also into this discussion. Dr. Snow, we've heard two sides. I mean, Professor Brahmachalani is of the view that this is somewhere the appeasement policies adopted by the United States of America and China has not been responded with in the adequate measure, versus what Andrew is talking about, that China had already drawn the red line, and it's in fact the U.S. administration or people and top leaders from the United States of America which have urged the Chinese. Between this dynamic going on between the Chinese and the Americans, there's the peace and stability of an entire region in jeopardy right now. What lies ahead?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You raised the idea of the international community response.
Yes.
And this is more critical than ever now. We can talk about U.S. and China. In this context, it's the regimes, it's the militaries, but there is global civil society. Wherever I go in the world, people don't want war. They don't want provocation. Now, interestingly, though, there were some in Chinese social media who were disappointed. I don't know the percentage of them, but it's an extreme position. They were disappointed that China didn't go far enough, that should have been more aggressive with its military response. Now, that's the kind of response we don't need. We need the cooler heads to prevail. I thought the G7 statement was very appropriate. It said there's no reason to have this military response to the visit of a high-level Washington official, and let's have now more reasoned approaches. I'll quote here that there is no justification to use a visit as pretext for aggressive military activity. And it urged, the G7 urged all sides, including really the global civil society, to remain calm, exercise restraint, act with transparency, and maintain open lines of communication. We cannot give up on diplomacy here. I know this is dramatic and it's worrisome. I can't imagine what it must feel like for the 24 million Taiwanese people seeing their island encircled. But we've got to diffuse this situation.
And Dr. Snow, I agree with you there. And the job of the international community and the regional blocs is far more important than ever, especially after what we have seen in Ukraine. Manju Seth, I'm coming to you and taking that point forward that Dr. Snow was mentioning, that we can talk about what US did right, what China did right, and what they both did wrong, and what lies ahead. But it's the future of millions of people at stake, the future of a region, the peace and stability at stake. What kind of role can international regional blocs really play in dousing the situation?
As you said, the situation at the moment is extremely, it's scary, and it's not something, at the moment, it's not actually a direct attack or a direct invasion, but at the same time, it's a very scary situation. It has jeopardized the regional security atmosphere entirely. And and who is to blame? As you said, it's difficult, everyone may be to blame. But China has also, perceived that it is now a powerful, powerful enough nation and will not tolerate these kind of pinpricks. So it is sending a message, and the way they have surrounded Taiwan right now with their military exercises, it is extremely, they've infiltrated, they've sort of infringed the maritime space of Taiwan, but they say this is part of our country.
Yeah.
And so this is the biggest dilemma for other countries. And the US has always been saying that, being always some kind of strategic ambiguity on the part of the US, saying that it recognizes the one China policy, but at the same time, it will come to its defense, to Taiwan's defense, if it is threatened or if its independence is threatened. So you see that kind of ambiguity that is there has also, and with this visit, the visit that took place 25 years ago of the former speaker, the situation was entirely different. Today, it is entirely different. And regional blocs or other international organizations, I think, are not going to be able to get much success, even if they do try. They should try and put pressure. But I think neither the ASEAN nor G7 will have, or the UN, will be able to actually make, I think, much difference at this point of time, because China says this is, you talk when you're attacking another country. They're saying we are not doing going to another country. This is part of our territory. It is part of China, and we can do what we like.
And this is the discourse that China has maintained in its territorial confrontations with various countries. And in fact, that's the stand that it has partly adopted with India as well. I'll come back to our guests. I request all of you to stay with us on the broadcast. There are some updates coming in on the story. Let's go to that. Well, there's a stunning claim by Japan. It says that 5 ballistic missiles launched by China's military have fallen into Japan's exclusive economic zones. The EEZ are recognized as legal zones for a country to conduct their business operations. There is certain degree of business exclusivity that the nations recognize in exclusive economic zones. Defense Minister has said that it marked the first time a ballistic missile belonging to Chinese military had landed within the waters. And I'm quoting what he said, what the Japanese minister said. This is a grave issue that concerns our country's national security and the safety of people, unquote. Kishi further said that the Japanese government also lodged a diplomatic protest and they will continue to oppose such moves by the Chinese government. That's the word really coming in. So the Chinese aggressive stand is not just against Taiwan, but it has clearly led the entire maritime region into a tension area, and there are multiple countries which are involved there. There's US, there's Japan, there's China, and if there is any kind of maritime conflict that, God forbid, emerges, it's going to impact multiple nations, and that's the situation that one needs to avert. And this is also happening at a time when Pelosi is reaching Japan. Well, Nancy Pelosi, you remember that visit. When she was in Taiwan, it raised a huge ruckus. The Beijing was not clearly happy. They said, we've drawn a red line. Then why is it that Nancy Pelosi is visiting? Will China also open or put forward a very aggressive foreign policy towards the Japanese as well? The two traditionally have had issues on multiple occasions. And along with Taiwan, is this the building up of tensions with yet another nation, or there is likely to be some kind of retreat? So let's see what happens. Those are the visuals on your screen right now. Nancy Pelosi arriving in Tokyo. And with her visit, we're also witnessing these kind of tensions really play out. I'll go back to Professor Brahmachalani, who continues to be with us on the broadcast. Professor, you pointed out that US perhaps has not put China in the right place. There's a certain policy of appeasement. Is this the policy of appeasement, or perhaps an indication of the changing global order where China is increasingly dominating and becoming more and more aggressive?
Well, it's also about politics in the US. The Democrats tend to be more focused on Russia, and the Republicans tend to look at China more closely. The issue is really this, that the future of American power will be determined not in Ukraine, but in Asia. And the conflict over the future status of Taiwan will determine the new global order. So if the Americans don't wake up to the new challenges in the Indo-Pacific, the US will not be able to retain its global preeminence. A Chinese takeover of Taiwan would upend the balance of power in the world and damage America's reputation as a reliable ally.
Professor,
here I want to,
Professor,
yeah,
I want to understand this from you directly. Sorry to interrupt you, but if I were to ask you very directly, what would be the right action for the Americans right now, keeping in mind the regional stability, the power balance that needs to be maintained, something that you're talking about?
Well, the Americans should be focusing on deterring and thwarting a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan. That should be the focus. The focus should not be on seeking to offer concessions to China, including potentially rolling back trade tariffs on Chinese goods. The focus ought to be on shoring up the defenses of Taiwan so that if the Chinese were to attack Taiwan, they would get a bloody nose. That should be the policy and strategy of the U.S.
Okay.
But you know, here, whatever things that we are seeing today, for example, the firing of ballistic missiles or ballistic missiles falling into the EEZ of Japan, or these provocative actions against Taiwan, nothing would serve Taiwan's defense interests better than a Chinese counterproductive action that serves as a wake-up call for American power elites, which largely remain fixated on Russia.
Okay. Okay. Point taken.
If the Chinese do something that is counterproductive to China's own long-term interests, it will serve Taiwan's defense interests.
Okay, I'm going to take that point to Dr. Nancy Snow and Manju Seth. Both of them have limited time. Dr. Snow, we were talking about the role of the regional blocs or the civil community and ensuring that there is peace and stability in the region. Perhaps Professor Chalani is giving us a reality check, and he's saying China needs to be responded to. They need to be told that their might can be countered, and perhaps that deterrent and that bloody nose is the only way possible. Do you agree?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I think there are many different types of responses you can give. And what we're seeing now is strength is begetting strength. And so it's a tit for tat. It's the old sort of, you do this, I do that. It sort of at times looks like kids on the playground. And he made me do it, that type of language. Let me speak to why Pelosi is in Japan. Japan plays a critical role here. Japan and the U.S. combined, the two largest democratic economies in the world. They are a counterweight, a counterbalance to China. I've lived in Japan the last 10 years, off and on, in Tokyo. And it is now taking on a larger role, a more assertive role. It's a member of the Quad. There was just the Quad meeting at the end of May. These are important regional dialogues. They're not treaty organizations, but they do have a role to play. And bloodying each other's noses is not the sort of picture I want to have.
I'm very short of time, hence I'm interrupting you. Manju Seth, I'm coming to you. A very short response from you. What is your bet? I mean, is it time to give up on diplomacy and administer a bloody nose to the Chinese, who have been trying to dominate the world and at various other scenarios with their aggressive posturing, or perhaps time to retain the dialogue and diplomacy?
I think giving a bloody nose in actual this thing would be very counterproductive. Economic bloody nose is what needs to be done, and to decouple the economies and the economic dependence on China, that would hurt them. I think those are the actions that need to be taken. And of course, diplomacy and dialogue should continue, but I don't know how effective, as I said, I don't know how effective it's going to be, because China does not feel that it is, it should listen to anyone, because it says it is, a very powerful country. And in Asia particularly, it says, I'm numero uno, and this is my sphere of influence, and it is telling the US. And as Professor Chalani said, it is a decline. It perceives U.S. weakness as a weaker state, and that is why it is becoming more assertive.
Well, here's hoping that we don't see another escalation in the Taiwanese Strait. Thank you, Professor Brahma Chalani, Andrew K.P. Leung, Manju Seth, and Dr. Nancy Snow, all of you, for joining us on the show and in this special conversation. We also get you a special conversation with Ting Ting Liu. She's the Foreign Affairs and Military Correspondent for TVBS News from Taiwan. Let's get in a word from her and try and understand what exactly is happening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. How is it that the Taiwanese administration views the Chinese action and aggression? And more importantly, how will the region guard its democratic interests?
Yes, we actually been seeing really very high military tension by the PLA around Taiwan. So the latest numbers I have here is that the Taiwanese Defense Ministry has confirmed that the PLA has actually fired 11 Zhongfeng ballistic missiles around northern, eastern, and southern waters in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they are also the PLA also actually fired live firing exercises consisting of long-range rockets around Taiwan, especially near the outer islands. So, these are a pretty strong military action we are seeing from the PLA army. And the Defense Ministry in Taiwan strongly condemned such a move. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan has just also released a press release, not only condemning, but also saying that such action is very similar to North Korea. So in a way, is that we are seeing a very strong condemnation and words coming out from the Taiwanese government.
Yeah, Leo, what kind of support and help can the international community, really give Taiwan? What is it that Taiwan expects from them? And the bigger concern by Chinese action is the threat to overall regional peace and stability.
I mean, like the Defense Ministry in Taiwan has stated very clearly is that Taiwan do not seek for war, but Taiwan is definitely prepared for war. But no doubt, I think nobody, especially in Taiwan, people in Taiwan are peace-loving people. People in Taiwan are resilient people. And then with that, I don't think anyone hopes to see full escalation into war. And but the problem now lies in whether there may be any miscalculation or mishandling of a situation, which result in a more or less than desirable development in that sense. Yeah. So I think everyone is watching the situation really closely. And as for the international community, I think the Taiwanese government is actually actively seeking more international attention in this region. We are actually seeing Taiwanese ambassadors or representatives around the world giving interviews and also raising attention to the Taiwan issue. Now it's currently unfolding in Taiwan, and the pressure and tension, military tension that we are currently experiencing. Yeah. But as to how to really diffuse the situation, I think it is not entirely up to Taiwanese to say that, because the current military drills and exercise are actually conducted by the PLA army.
Yeah. Leo, the Chinese argue that the present tensions are provoked after the visit of Nancy Pelosi. What kind of help does Taiwan expect from partner countries like United States of America? Because that's going to be very critical for Taiwan.
I think the Taiwanese government also do hope that the international community continues to monitor and pay attention to the tension we are experiencing here. But as we actually did see improvement and warmer ties between U.S. and Taiwan over the past few years, and as to especially and that is not only in terms of governments, culturally, economically, Taiwan it has actually been actively working with U.S. and other democratic country counterparts.
Yeah. My last question to you: the Chinese are not just indulging into military action, but also threatening or are indulging into economic consequences as well. What are the fears of the business community post the Chinese threat?
I mean, after Pelosi's visit, we have seen very strong reaction economically from the PRC government. They have actually imposed sanctions, so they have banned the imports of more than, I think, from 1,400 companies which produce food products in Taiwan. So basically, they have banned food imports from Taiwan, and also and on top of that, Taiwanese citrus fruits. That's actually a lot, and also fishes from Taiwan, 2 types of fishes. And we are also seeing the Taiwanese business community watching this really, really closely on how things will eventually unfold. And I think, as in terms of the Taiwanese stock market today, there was actually a bit of tension there. It actually opened on more on the low side, but I think currently it is still everything's still under control, and the government is telling people that no doubt the Taiwan will actually experience a lot of trafficking is coming out from the PLA, coming out from the PRC government. And I think the Taiwanese people are freedom-loving people, Taiwanese people are resilient people, and you need to know that actually this kind of threat has always been around there for quite some time.
All right, Liu, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and getting us all that perspective from the ground. The next 72 hours are going to be very, very critical, and the entire world watches with a bated breath about what happens in the